Hey folks, John Miller, propanebuzz.com here. Once again joined by Michael Clark of bamwx.com. Thanks for joining us again, Michael. I saw something that came out on Thursday. There was an El Nino alert. I don't say if it's alert, warning, watch. I don't know what the term is. You know, it sounds to me like some meteorologists are beginning to think that El Nino conditions could arise at some point in time in the next several months. And I wanted to get you back on it specifically, maybe expand on this, because you touched on it briefly last week in our video when we discussed some things you were looking at for possible winter of 18-19 impacts. And you did talk about ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation Area, and how that could have an impact. So why don't you explain what this watch is, what the greater meteorological community is looking for time-wise on this, and how you think that can affect temperatures in North America this coming winter?
Yeah, John, so that's a great question. You know, the CPC or NOAA issued their El Nino watch as a 64% probability of a development of an El Nino here by fall into winter. And really, I have no reason to disagree with that percentage, with that idea that there isn't an El Nino of some kind coming. What's interesting is the Modoki or Modokai, however you want to pronounce it, formation that's possible with this El Nino. And what that means is more of a central-based El Nino event where the warmer water anomalies are centered more towards the central Pacific Ocean rather than closer up to the coast of South America. What's really important in winter temperatures is there's a strong correlation to east-based Ninos that are warmer, oftentimes can result in very warm CONUS temperatures.
CONUS being the continental United States.
Exactly, yes. In this event here, there are some indications or some possibilities that it could be more of a central-based event. And those largely would favor a colder outcome, especially because of another factor we look at, which is called the QBO, which is basically winds in that region, the upper-level winds in that region, if you will, kind of simply put. When we have an easterly QBO like we have right now and a central-based El Nino, we increase the potential for high-latitude blocking, specifically the NAO or the Greenland block. And that negative NAO obviously can lock in cold temperature patterns in the wintertime, especially in the eastern U.S. and some of those areas that demand a lot of heat in the higher populated areas. So what's different this year versus, let's say, last year where we had a false alarm of an El Nino onset is the subsurface temperature anomalies, the water below the surface. There's a huge pool of warm water just sitting there kind of waiting to be tapped into. And looking at some of the new seasonal data just in this month, we have the JAMSTEC, the European seasonal, the multi-model ensemble. Those models indicating a central-based El Nino and an overall colder pattern for December, January, February. Now, again, it's incredibly early, as you know, and everybody knows watching this. But if we can get this central-based El Nino set up with this easterly QBO, it could be really good for another cold winter, and that kind of goes in line with the solar minimum that we're experiencing as well. So right now, early indications are not bad for a cold winter.
Right. I mean, if you're in our industry that relies on home heating and you're hoping that, you know, there's a number of factors that have to line up to get a cold winter, and the things that are beginning to show themselves right now, think of it as a corn crop. The corn's just coming out of the ground. Okay, it looks pretty good. These early clues or signals, you would want these to be in your camp as opposed to a more canonical equatorial basin-wide type of El Nino setup that we had in 16, 17. And that's the one thing. I think a lot of people that in our industry that are retailers that aren't geeks like me and spend time on the weather and aren't, you know, educated like you who've spent their careers learning about it, they hear the term El Nino right now and they're like, oh crud, another 16, 17, warmest winter of all time is coming. not every El Nino is the same, and it has to do with the core of the water, which is what you're talking about with the more central-based Molokai. I've put some maps up as we're talking so people can understand when you talk about central-based versus a more canonical basin-wide, so they can see that. So they've already been able to see that. Is that kind of what we're talking about here? Then not all El Ninos are the same?
Exactly. Yeah. Not exactly. Yeah. That central based versus that east based or basin wide makes all the difference in the world. If for some reason we start to trend more towards a basin wide strong El Nino, then obviously this entire thought process would change.
For sure.
You know, but right now, based on what we're seeing in the early indicators, they are favorable right now for some more cold, especially versus the traditional winter Ninos. The other thing interesting too, I'll add just real quick, in this kind of setup, there's a lot of research that suggests with the negative NAOs and the easterly QBO that there can be big time winter storms up the East Coast. There can be big blizzards. So that's something that's an interesting piece to the puzzle as well.
Michael, what would be the most recent year that we've experienced? And not all central-based Molokai El Ninos are the same either. It probably had their downstream effects likely have a lot to do with their exact positioning in the Central Pacific. But what's the most recent year that we've experienced a Molokai? Was it somewhat 13, 14 and into 14, 15 or?
It was, and I would have to look more into that, John, but I think that is the most recent similar setup. And maybe the next week when we talk, I can bring some more of those years to the table.
Let's do that.
And I think there's definitely been a few, and we definitely have a good data set to go by. But the interesting thing about 13-14 was there wasn't really any negative NAO, and we still managed to become very, very cold. So we don't have to have that, but that negative NAO that can really make it colder in the higher demand markets, like where there's 60 million people in the Northeast. So those are just interesting factors when you talk about home heating. There's a lot of homes up there.
Yeah, a lot of homes up there, and I think in 13-14 too, and why each of the you can't just like you can't get scared when you hear the term El Nino. You can't start putting money in the bank and think you're going to have a great winter just because you have a central-based El Nino. Because I also think in 13-14, and I'm not sure what the meteorological term is for this, I just heard a lot of people calling it the blob. You had anomalously warm sea surface temperatures off the coast of Alaska that just seemed to send the jet up and over and down the cold the backside. So who knows if that will be present this year as well.
The PDO, or the Pacific Decadal Oscillation.
There you go.
So it was monster positive in 13-14. So there's so many pieces to the puzzle. And the good thing is some of the really big pieces to the puzzle look good right now.
Yep, and that's, I think, a good place to leave this, because we're talking macro level stuff right now. And one of the things, I know some of these terms may be going over some of your heads, but if you stay with me and stay with us, Michael Clark and BAMWX.com, as I announced in last week's video, they're our meteorological partner. You're going to be seeing and hearing a lot from them during the course of your subscription to this when we announce our subscription offerings here in a couple of weeks. Michael does a fantastic job of educating. Most everything I know, as I'm spitting out some of these terms too, I've learned from Michael and his team, and you can too. And this may be a tagline for me in this business, but an informed and educated retailer is a more profitable retailer. Period. End of sentence. One last thing for you to tease your video that you did today that I'd like everybody to watch as well. You came up with some interesting comments, maybe correlations, as it relates. Everybody thinks, oh my gosh, it's warm and it's dry. How's that going to impact yield, because the daily high temperatures are going to be in the hundreds? And those things certainly have an impact. Don't want to say they don't. But what about the level of overnight low temperatures? And I think you guys talked about that today.
We did. Overnight lows are key. I mean, if you look at, we did a study from June to August of 2009 where the average minimum temperature in Iowa, for example, was 58 degrees. The carry out there, the yield was 181 bushels.
Yes, phenomenal.
But if you go to 2010, where you had beneficial rain, but an average overnight low of just 6 degrees warmer, sitting at 65 or 7 degrees warmer, there you were 165 on a yield. So you trim it down almost by 20, just from an overnight low perspective. And in 2010, there wasn't a drought, there wasn't a lack of rain. It was the warmer temperatures at night, because that corn crop it can't relax and rest at night when overnight lows are warmer. And coming into this weekend, we've got record overnight lows expected in the upper 70s. So that's gonna, that's certainly an aspect to keep in mind. Even though it's raining, that's great, but we're also dealing with a record stretch of heat over the last 45 days. Compared to the last 126 years, it's the hottest 45-day stretch for a lot of people. It's very warm out there.
Well, I'm getting ready to pack up and head to Iowa for a week, so good timing. I'll bring the antiperspirant with me. So
yeah.
Michael, as always, appreciate your time and your expertise. Really excited about continuing to do these things, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Thank you, John. Have a good one.
All right, take care.